You're listening to This Naked Mind with Annie Grace.
Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to This Naked Mind podcast. And I'm here with Michael. Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great, Annie. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here. So why don't you sort of take us back to the beginning in your relationship with alcohol? Where did it all start for you?
I would say my relationship with alcohol started in graduate school. I was sort of a late bloomer. I started in my late 20s. Prior to that, I was teaching at a Christian college. I had gone to a Christian college. It was part of a vibrant faith community. But in my 20s, something just wasn't jiving. I had known for a long time that I felt different. I was attracted to other guys. And according to the faith tradition I was a part of, that was not okay. That was sinful. And so I was really only left with two options if I were to stay in the church or in this community. And that was either to live a celibate life or to join a ministry where they pray the gay away and work in reparative therapy. And so I tried that. And my faith and spirituality was really important to me. This community was important to me. And so I did all of that, but I wasn't successful. And I just really struggled because I felt that I can't be a good Christian. I can't be a good follower. I can't be a, person of faith and be gay. Those two just weren't compatible in this world. And so there were things about this community too that I started to see some red flags. There was a lot of control. There was a lot of, unquestioning of authority. There was a lot of groupthink and just kind of gave me cult vibes after a while. And there were things that just weren't sitting right with me anymore. And so I left that, but didn't leave the church. And I was able to kind of extricate myself from that community when I went to graduate school to do my PhD. I'm going to do a PhD so I could continue on in academia. And even though I was able to leave that environment, this struggle between my faith and my sexuality continued. And it was like this tug of war, where on the one hand, it felt like I had to walk the straight and narrow to be a faithful disciple and to deny the desires of the flesh and go to heaven. Or I could live who I thought I was going to be, but then end up in hell. And neither of those pictures was very attractive, obviously. And, I felt very much alone in this struggle because I was no longer part of that community much, didn't have contacts since I had moved away for graduate school, couldn't really talk with a lot of the new friendships I was forming and other graduate students because they would just think I was crazy. I was afraid they'd think I was crazy for having, they'd say, "What's your problem? Live your life." And so I just kind of struggled in silence, but I did go back to that community for some event and shared this struggle that I had with a mentor of mine. He was a pastor, one of the pastors of the church, and he and his wife had played a really instrumental role in my life. And when I shared with him that I just didn't see that this was changeable, or that I just didn't see how this was going to work out. He looked at me and he said, and I'll never forget this. He said, "Brother Michael, Satan wants your soul." And then he repeated it again. He said, "Satan wants your soul." And I just started sobbing in that moment. Not only because that's a really heavy thing to hear, but at that point, I knew I could just no longer be part of this community. And those tears were just grief that I was saying goodbye. I just could no longer be part of this community or this type of exclusive, rigid type of faith. And I didn't know what would happen to me. And so went back to where I was studying, and it was in this environment where I found alcohol. I had all this turmoil going on, and it was just through, meeting up with friends after a graduate seminar, or, we were also TAs, we were teaching. And so we might go out afterwards and hang out and drink. And it was like, all of a sudden, that tug of war stopped. All that anxiety, all of that existential angst, this sort of, feeling that my soul was a battleground of some cosmic struggle between good and evil, just dissolved. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I don't have this voice constantly shaming me, constantly telling me I'm going to hell, or just the intense anxiety I felt. It just calmed it all down, and I had some sort of peace. And so that's really how it started. I didn't become a daily drinker, drinking all the time after that, because obviously I had no tolerance. I was a non-drinker before then. But I think that beginning, just me actually seeing, wow, this is helping something. This is calming that intense struggle. And I just wanted a break from it. And alcohol did that. And so, alcohol was part of my life. It was, as graduate students, we would go out, we would, it's very social, didn't seem like a problem at all. But over time, obviously, it increased. And, that intense struggle between my faith and sexuality it died down after a while. But like most minds do, it then jumps to something else to obsess and be anxious about and worry about. And in my case, it was no different, whether it was my dissertation, whether I'd fail out of graduate school, or relationship issues, or getting a job in academia. All of these things just became, big areas of anxiety in my life. And alcohol was always there to calm down those voices, to calm down that tug of war that I felt I was in. And so it just seemed like, and what's interesting is all of those scary stories that my mind had painted for me never came true. Mm. And it's interesting because each time I kind of, and I don't want to give the impression that I lived in this constant state of fear and anxiety for several years. It went in seasons. It ebbed and flowed, and sometimes I was fine, and then something would come up, and my mind would blow it out of proportion and became a big deal, whatever it was. And alcohol just seemed to take that edge off. It became, just very much ingrained in different parts of my life. The man that I met in graduate school, fell in love with, who eventually became my husband, is from Spain and introduced me to red wine. And as part of their culture, we would plan trips to wineries or go to Mexico to try mezcal, just different things that alcohol was a part of it. We wouldn't say we took trips just for the alcohol, but it was just very much a part of our lives. But like I said, that anxiety was still there, and it would come up in big ways, and the content of it would change, whether it was my own research, my degree, something in my work, or health issues, which was the one that really increased my anxiety. It was just the same thing. My mind painting scary stories of what might or could happen. but leaving that might and could out of the equation and just presenting it to me as it's good as guaranteed. Even though, like I said, none of that happened. None of those scary stories happened. By appearances, I was successful. My partner and I both got academic jobs in the same university. We both got tenure. I was doing triathlons. Everything just looked good on the outside, but on the inside, I would go through these periods of fear, worry, and feeling disconnected, just feeling like I didn't belong somehow. And yeah, alcohol was there. But as it increased, there was the sense that my anxiety was now turning to the alcohol itself. And alcohol was now the problem I was anxious about. Was I drinking too much?
Mm-hmm.
How much am I drinking compared to other people? When we're out at a restaurant, how much is there? Are we going to order another bottle? I don't want to be the one to order it. Just this real fear of being exposed again as, now he has a problem. So there was just a lot of hiding. My tolerance was getting higher. I started hiding bottles of alcohol around the house just so that, because I wanted to have a drink or two before dinner so I could have a glass of wine or two or three at dinner with my husband, but that was never enough. So I had to have something before dinner, something after dinner. And, as you know, it just spirals to the point where my husband found empty bottles around the house. And there, he confronted me with it. And I don't know what I said. It just would make something like, I would kind of blow it off. I would be like, oh yeah, it's nothing, or it's just something ridiculous, trying to divert attention. But it got to the point, where he found an empty bottle that had been full the day before, and just sat me down and said, this has to stop. This has to change. I love you. I love you, but I can't live with this fear. I can't. I'm afraid. I'm scared for you. I'm scared for me. And this needs to stop. And that just, it just affected me really deeply, because here I was someone that was always trying to accommodate people, make people feel okay. And as someone who felt that I didn't fit in or felt disconnected somehow, to then have the person I loved the most, basically, or me interpreting his fear that, now I'm a burden. And that's not what he said. He was just being honest that he was afraid. He was afraid for my health. He was afraid for him, what was going to happen here. But I took on that extra shame that maybe he's better without me. Maybe I'm just not good with people. Maybe I just need to go away. And at that time, the only option I knew was AA. And there was just no way I was going to go through that. Not because of something bad about AA. It had more to do with my own baggage about churches. And these meetings were taking place in a church basement, and they were in secret or anonymous. And just all kinds of alarms went off that said, no freaking way am I going to set foot in a place like that. So I thought, well, I'll just do, hey, I can do a dissertation. I did a dissertation. I can do research. I've done half Ironmans. I can beat this. And so I just kind of put all my willpower into it, and maybe would go for a couple weeks without drinking. And then, of course, as we know, the willpower runs out. And there was just this back and forth. So once again, I was in a tug of war. This time it was between really wanting the alcohol and feeling like I needed it, that it's what was, helping me relax and calm that anxiety and making me feel okay. And yet at the same time, hating what it was doing to me, hating that I needed it, hating that I had to hide it, and wanted that tug of war to stop. Once again, wanted that tug of war to stop. And so it was in January of 2020. It was dry January. So I thought, okay, new year, new month. I'm going to do dry January and turn over a new leaf. And I came across your book, This Naked Mind. And I had actually downloaded a day counting app where you can just put in whatever habit you're trying to abstain from. In the resources section, they had a whole bunch of books. And the only book on alcohol that didn't scare me was yours. It said, This Naked Mind, Control Alcohol. And I thought, well, that's perfect, because I don't want to stop drinking. Just want to control this. I just want to, get this under control. That's all. So I downloaded the book right away. And I did what you basically tell readers not to do. I'd read it all in 1 or 2 sittings and just consumed it and as I was reading it, I thought, I need to stop and think about this. I need to process this more deeply, but I want to keep going. I want to find out more. So I just blazed through it. And there were 2 things that just jumped out at me. The first was you saying that it wasn't my fault, that I wasn't broken, that my brain was actually working perfectly. My brain was doing exactly what a brain does when it's exposed to high amounts of a toxic and addictive substance. There's nothing wrong with me. The problem is the alcohol. And that just blew me away. It released me from so much shame, because up until then, I had thought, why can't I beat this? I'm above average intelligence. I have these degrees and I'm strong. I'm a disciplined person. I do these athletic events. Why can't I beat this? But then to see that it wasn't my fault and my brain and my body were responding to alcohol exactly how it should. So that was just huge for me to see. And the second was seeing the intense amount of conditioning that we have as a society and the cognitive bias that exists surrounding alcohol, with studies that red wine is good for you. The way you just pulled back the curtain on all of that and the research you cited, and even though I'm not a researcher on alcohol or addiction research, I have a PhD. I know how to read research studies. I conduct research. And so I was able to actually look up the studies you mentioned and be able to say, okay, I can trust Annie here. She's what she's saying is right. And so then trust was a big thing for me. So I felt like, okay, I can trust this. And what was amazing was, I intended to go for dry January, and I went 60 days just after reading that with those 2 insights. And then, of course, March 2020 happened and the world changed before our eyes. And I started drinking again, but I couldn't unlearn what I had seen. And so I stayed in the conversation. I was watching, since I really resonated with your book, I found you on YouTube, started watching some of your YouTube videos. In one of your interviews, you interviewed Dr. Amy Johnson, and I resonated with her. So I started following her. And I feel like during the pandemic, you and Amy were helping me so much during that time. And yeah, I was still drinking, but that shame had been taken away. And so I might go several weeks or another month or 2 without drinking, go back, but I was staying in the conversation. But I knew that each time I started drinking again, it became more intense. Something in me knew that my drinking days were numbered, and this habit or addiction was coming to an end, and just with the pandemic, the stress I was under as an educator, a lot of educators, teachers of all levels, the stress that so many of us were under, the riots happening in cities across the country, all the drama surrounding the 2020 election here in the United States. There was just, wanting to numb all of that was certainly understandable, but it was becoming clear to me that it wasn't sustainable for much longer. And so the end of December, because I was following you on Facebook or YouTube, I saw you were doing a live alcohol experiment in January 2021, and I signed up. And it was such a game changer for me to be in a community, even though it was on Facebook, and I actually had left Facebook a number of years back, but I got back on Facebook just to do the live alcohol experiment and to be with, well over 1,000 people that from all over the world, of all these different ages and backgrounds, and they all were struggling with this. And that in and of itself was very powerful. It made me see that I wasn't alone, that this is way more common than we think. And then, of course, the content, having you in my inbox every morning, seeing those videos where we just dug into what we think alcohol is doing for us, listing why we're drinking, why we want to change our relationship with alcohol. And then getting curious about, what is this really doing for us? Is it doing what we think it is? Is our mind telling us the truth about this substance? And it was powerful. It was really powerful for me. And the coaches, the live sessions, I just went all in. I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to all the lives I can. I want to, learn as much as I can. And, I can't say enough about the coaches in that live. I remember Ellie, Emma, Brandy, Simon, Onawa. I just was always at their lives, asking questions, interacting with them, and their compassion, their wisdom, their warmth and kindness and generosity just made such an impact. And when I got to the end of the 30 days, I looked back at my list of whys from the first day, and I think I had about 10, and 9 of them had gone away, saying that alcohol doesn't make me relax. It doesn't make me happy. All of these things that I just assumed about the substance through our conditioning, they just no longer made sense. And so I was kind of riding this high of like, wow, this is amazing. I was feeling better than I had in years. I had more energy. I was working out more. I was much more clear-headed in my research, my teaching, and all of that, more present in my relationships. But eventually the honeymoon wore off. And by mid-2021, I just found myself in this depression, in this anxiety again. It wasn't as intense as previously. I had seen how alcohol was actually causing way more anxiety than it was relieving. But I just thought, why am I back in this sort of funk? Why am I not feeling liberated? Why am I not? I know alcohol isn't the answer, and I don't really want it, but I just feel really bad. Just don't feel right in my own skin. I feel disconnected. I feel, and I went back, and the one why that did not fall away in those 30 days was, I drink because alcohol helps me numb and check out. And that's true. Alcohol does numb. And so I really had to get curious. What was I numb? Why? What was I trying to numb? Why was I wanting to check out? And yeah, it was anxiety, but I just felt like, oh, maybe there's probably unresolved trauma. There's, who knows? Everything just felt really heavy. And I thought, I'm 4.5, 5 months alcohol free, but I feel terrible. And I don't know if this is worth it. And I was still listening. I was still listening to you. I was listening to your podcast. I was in Spain in the summer of 2021, where I go every year to work with our university's international programs. And I feel like that summer of 2021, you and Rob Bell and Amy Johnson and Glennon Doyle were my constant companions and podcasts and listening. There was one day where I was just feeling like, what am I doing? This is just not, I was just really depressed, feeling alone, disconnected, all kinds of stuff. And I happened to catch one of Amy Johnson's lives, her Ask Amy, where someone asked a question about loneliness. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is relevant. And I don't remember exactly what she said, but what I heard was something along the lines of an invitation to be curious about the experience of loneliness and disconnection, and how there are times we feel lonely and disconnected and times we don't, regardless of the circumstances outside. So we can be with the people we love and people close to us and yet feel incredibly disconnected or lonely. And there are times that we don't. There are times we can be alone in nature and sense this oneness and connection, even though no one's around. So what is that? And then she said something like, what if what we're really feeling is a story of loneliness? A left brain interpreter that's saying, I'm lonely, I'm disconnected because of stuff in the past. And so something in the future, this is how it's going to be in the future. But what if in reality, as humans, we share one essence? And what if we are more connected than we could ever imagine? And tears just welled up in my eyes when I heard that something landed. And then another part of me said, that's just way too woo-woo for me. That's a little too out there. I don't know about that. But I couldn't shake it. There was something I thought, this makes sense. Just like I was believing my mind's stories about alcohol. What if I'm just believing a story about me being disconnected? What if I really do fit? What if connection is my nature? And I just went outside, and I was in Valencia, Spain, and went to the central market where there's just all of these people. And it's an amazing place. And all of these people that I didn't know that were moving in and out. And I just felt just had this sense of that essence or of this connection that is really hard to put into words, but it landed so deeply. And I just got a glimpse that, oh my gosh, I've been believing a story that, yes, this is my nature, my nature's connection. I'm not separate from life. I'm part of life. And I can't be separate. I can't be disconnected from that. And it's hard to put that into words because and it does sound a little woo-woo, but it really landed with me. And it just got me thinking to get curious about my own stories around anxiety, around worry, around self-doubt. And that exploration is when I really started to see things turn around. That, yeah, I would still experience anxiety and get caught up, but I started seeing it as a story that I was believing. And when I would come back to the present moment, it wasn't there. There was something else there. And this didn't happen overnight. I mean, that one experience was really impactful, but it took a while. It's almost like a train or a vehicle that's going fast. You hit the brakes, but the vehicle's still moving, so my thoughts were still kind of going, and I would get in these worry loops, but something had shifted there. And I came back from Spain and decided to do the September 21 live alcohol experiment, just because I was convinced that I was done with alcohol. And I just wanted to there was so much amazing content in the alcohol experiment that I felt like I want to go back and do this again. And I did. And it was absolutely the insights that I had. And there were things that I saw completely different that I didn't see in January. There was an offhanded comment you make in one of the videos about how is it that we give so much meaning to this liquid in a glass? And again, I was like, oh my gosh, I keep talking about how I want to change my relationship with alcohol and alcohol this and that, but alcohol has no agency. It's an inanimate substance. I can't have a relationship. I can't have a relationship with a liquid like alcohol any more than I can have a relationship with laundry detergent. Really. I mean, it just blew my mind. I just started laughing. I was like, oh, the relationship is with my thoughts. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those moments where I can't believe I didn't see that before. It seemed so obvious, but it's just really cool. And lots of different things like that happened that month. And at the end of September of 2021, I kind of knew I was done. I knew I didn't want this to be just an experiment anymore. And just wanted to share with you what I wrote on the Facebook page, my very last day of the alcohol experiment, because it really just tied up so much of how things turned around for me. So I said, being on this journey has made me realize that I viewed alcohol as an emergency exit to numb anxiety, worry loops, and other uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. Now I'm beginning to see that there really is no emergency. A true emergency would call me to action, call an ambulance, escape a burning building, and so forth. But thoughts and feelings, as difficult as they can be, are not an emergency, nor are they something I need to escape from. I think my way forward is learning how to sit with them, lean into them, learn from them, and to become aware of other exits my mind offers me to give me temporary relief. And and then that final why disappeared when I saw that I don't need an emergency exit. There's nothing I need to numb. There's nothing I need, no experience that, as difficult as it may be, that I need to manage, control, enhance, or numb. I can be with it. And I'm much more resilient than I could imagine.
Well, that's amazing, Michael. Just so great. So powerful. We're going all the way back to the beginning. How have you made peace with your faith?
It's an ongoing process, but you actually had a role in that without knowing it. In 2020, when I was, listening to you and things like that, I was getting your emails, and I read one of your emails, and my heart just sank and had this sudden burst of fear because I saw you were interviewing Rob Bell. And Rob Bell and I went to the same Christian school at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And I had, we were in different circles, so we didn't really know each other. And because I had left that world, the last thing I knew about Rob Bell was that he was pastor of a megachurch and all of this. And so I thought, oh no, Annie, what are you doing? I trusted you and now you're bringing this back in. But I listened, and I had to listen again because I was crying the whole way through that conversation. And then I reached out to Rob and just thanked him for, I read his book like right away, Everything is Spiritual. And it was through kind of your work and having Rob on your podcast that I was able to explore spirituality again, explore issues of faith again in a way that felt authentic to me. That just wasn't like anything I had seen. And so that was a huge step, because I felt that I was disconnected spiritually, and that helped bring me back.
That's really cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I can't thank you enough for the work that you do. It's just amazing. I'm seeing more and more how curiosity is central to changing any habit. And the way you invite us to be curious along with you about these beliefs in a way where there is no shame, no judgment. It's that we're experimenting. We're just getting curious about this. Let's see. And that invitation made me feel safe.
Yeah.
And I can't thank you enough for creating a space for those of us who have felt like there weren't safe spaces, to be in a space where we could be curious, to ask questions without a firm commitment to lifelong sobriety or anything like that. Just to take a look at this. It was so life-changing for me, and I can't thank you enough.
What's also really cool about curiosity is it's a filter by which you can sort of at a principle level, I feel, discern where there's wisdom or where there's fear. Because if there's fear, like the group you described in the beginning, is probably very against curiosity. Questions were probably about it. But I feel that, if there's a God that's created every single thing I see, experience, and understand, then there would never be a question that was too big. I mean, hello, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, of course,
I know.
Question would welcome. And so it's so helpful, even outside of a spiritual realm, just looking like, is somebody willing to be questioned? Is somebody willing to, allow others curiosity? Is curiosity welcomed here? Or is it not? Is it shut down? Are you made to feel wrong when you ask questions? And I feel like that's such a good filter between places where you'll find wisdom and growth and places where you'll find fear and you won't find,
Yeah. And that's what I sensed in your programs and in your videos and also some others, just that sense of curiosity, that it's okay to ask these questions. And we may not even have answers, but let's explore this. Let's ask the questions. And can we get a little more curious about sort of the dogmatic beliefs that our mind has been presenting us about X, Y, or Z? And know that those beliefs aren't, I went through a period where I felt like, oh, my mind's the enemy here. But to see that, no, these stories were created, this chatter arose out of protection at some point in time. And, our brain wants to protect us. It wants to protect and predict and all of that it's all very well-meaning. It's not the enemy. It's, and even I started seeing that, even when I was dealing with cravings around alcohol. And I know some people like to really demonize, they call it the wine witch. They call those voices very negative names. And I get it. I get why people do that. But I also think, that voice is trying to be helpful and we're misunderstanding it. In my case, yeah, it was calming intense anxiety and fear about, was I going to hell? And something that calmed that down. Well, of course, my brain's going to remember that and say, hey, do this. It's not an evil, it's not a witch. It's not evil. It's trying to get me. It's trying to be helpful, and we misunderstand it. And to learn to be compassionate with that and know that we don't have to identify with it anymore. We can see it as, okay, there it is. This is trying to be helpful, but I don't need that protection, that help anymore.
Right. And really understanding that any place where there still exists fear of the substance, of yourself, it's not free. And the only way to really find your way past that fear, like if it's fear that's keeping you sober, like I would suggest that there's another layer of freedom that's available to you, right? Because
absolutely,
we can do a lot of things with the animating energy of fear. We can get us pretty far, but it's not really freedom. And back to that litmus test of curiosity, like, I mean, I was so curious in my story that I went ahead and got drunk.
Right. I know.
Just how it felt, right? Like there was no fear in me of any truth. Like I was valuing what was true over valuing what I should or shouldn't do, right? Like I was so willing to be like, okay, even if like I was willing to go and get drunk in front of a camera and have the outcome be that, yeah, I overreacted. No big deal. I should start drinking again. Like I was willing for that to be the outcome. I was willing for the other outcome too, which is what happened. I was like, there's nothing here. Why would I ever do that again? But like the place of freedom in that, like, just like radical level of curiosity, right? And it's one of the things that I find really heartbreaking about existing recovery structures is they are fear. There's so much, and so much shame. And it's one of the things I find most heartbreaking about like the brokenness of churches is that what came from love is governed by fear. And what that man said to you, he was afraid for you, he was afraid. And that fear just like, it doesn't, it's not of God, like how I understand any sort of creator that could possibly exist. It is there's no duality in that. We introduce the duality when we introduce our own thinking. And the main way, very sadly, that we introduce the duality is when we judge ourselves. Yes. Because in that shame that the most duality exists, the most fear existed is when we think we aren't okay, right? When we think we aren't okay. And if you consider the path to self-compassion, we think like this self-work, like we want to work. I like my friend Jay, he says like, when you want to work like 5 levels out, you want to work on like the general public. If you imagine you're the first level, your family's the second level, your close circle of friends is the third level, your kind of work is the 4th level, and then the public's opinion of you is the 5th level. Like you kind of want to work like many levels out, and we discount the first level work. But if you imagine, like if we can find self-compassion in ourselves, when we know all of our thoughts and all of our judgments, and it's no human being, it's not pleasant up in there. It's just not. The thinker thinks it's just a mess. And so if we can find self-compassion and accept our thoughts and accept them as protection, accept them as, and if we can do that, then like that will spill out to the whole rest of the world. Like it doesn't even take effort not to judge other people, because you found for when you're face to face with all the worst of what the mind can offer, which is what happens inside. But it's kind of tangential. I just so agree with you. And
no, it's perfect. And it's what you say, that you're seeing that our mind is not the enemy, it's there for protection. And for me, learning to have compassion with that that harsh, judgmental voice that was shaming, it was trying to protect me. It was trying to keep me small and keep me safe because of some really bad stuff that happened as a kid, and to be like, oh, okay, yeah, you're just trying to do your job. And you believe that this is helping me, and to really say, okay, I don't need your protection, but just come along for the ride. I know you've got a lot to say right now, so you can ride in the back seat. I'd almost think of it that way, like, okay, I'm not trying to banish you, because then that only makes it louder. But to say, okay, I know you want to, these voices, these thoughts, they want to be seen. They arise because they want to be seen, they want to be felt, and they want to move on. But we spend so much time trying to resist them, or push them down, or shame them away, or fight them, whatever.
Yeah.
When if we just let them be and know that it's a story and they're trying to be helpful, and just let them come along for the ride. Sometimes they get loud. It's very much like the example you give about the 5-year-old with the ice cream, who wants the ice cream so bad and is just screaming in the car. It can be like that. You're just like, okay, yeah, okay, keep not gonna, but you'll eventually run out of steam, and you're okay. You're still riding along. I've got you. We don't have to identify with it. So the way you've talked about some of this and getting curious about our beliefs, and some others, it's just been really helpful not to see the wisdom in that they are protective, and we don't need to think of them as the enemy. We can welcome them and allow them to be, and they'll move on.
Yeah. And when they get stuck is when we resist, when we get stuck in our stories, and then it just entrenches and entrenches.
Right. And it still happens to me. We all still get caught up, but the difference now is that I have this little bit of space to see where I can be really in it, where something will, whatever, work related or whatever related, doesn't really matter. And I can know it's a story, and it can be still painful. It can still be stressful and all of that. But there's still this little bit of space that I'm able to fall back into and say, okay, this is not all there is. I'm seeing this is a story that's playing out, needs to be heard, but I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Absolutely. That's so true.
I'm not broken, and this story cannot break me either.
That's great. Well, Michael, this has been such a pleasure. Let me ask you the 2 questions to
Sure.
First of all, if people are interested in your coaching, where can they find you?
They can find me at openvistascoaching.com.
Amazing. And then if you were going to go back in time and talk to I'll let you pick when. I usually pinpoint a place in the story, but I think it's going to be better if you pick today. But just to a former Michael who you've shared with us, and you were going to tell him about what life is like now, what would you say?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I think there'd be 2 questions, and it would be those invitation questions. Those what if questions. What if you're not broken? And what if everything you're looking for outside of yourself is already yours? That peace, that connection is already part of who you are. And you're just caught up in a story right now. Don't take my word for it. Just consider and be curious and see what opens up for you. And that's think that's what I would say.
I love that. And I love it too, because I think you might be one of the first people who has asked questions. I can't remember that having happened before. And I am reflecting on that, and of course I frame what advice would you give or what would you say? So I don't know, maybe my frame has something to do with it, but I'm just reflecting on this idea of working with the brain instead of against it. And working with the brain is all about the questions and not at all about the advice. Brain advice, it's like, no, thank you, I'm good.
Yeah.
You ask a brain a question and it's like, boom, like, just fires to life. Yes, let me answer, let me
answer. Let me consider that. Yeah.
Advises it to consider asking a question instead of giving an answer. It's beautiful. That's amazing. This has been great.
Well, thank you, Annie. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you're ready to see how This Naked Mind can help you on your personal health and wellness journey and want to learn more, go to thisnakedmindpodcast.com to learn what your next best step is. Again, that's thisnakedmindpodcast.com. We have all of our free resources, programs, social links, and more available for you there. Plus, if you have your own naked life story to share, you can submit it there as well. Until next week, stay curious.